Okay. Okay, so the next step, so we've got all our agents in the rig. We've created the output where we want to connect this output to our new MIDI rig eventually. So the next thing to do, so I touched upon this at the end of the audio units, building an audio unit instrument seminar, is so the recorder has got all these inputs. It's got the pressure input from the keys. It's got like what else has it got? It's got well, it's got a few inputs anyway. It's got, I'm just trying to think what it does have. There's an activation input as well by standard, but there's also a lot of auxiliary inputs. So you've got the kind of the basic ones that would make notes get connected. So you've got pressure, and you've got, it's called an activation input, which tells it which key you're pressing, and the pressure input tells you how hard the key is being pressed. But what we need to do, because when we want to connect the key group output 44 from key group 1 to the recorder, we don't just want to connect the notes. We want to connect the strip controllers. We want to connect the breath controller. We want to connect the pedals, the absolute strip position. So there's all these, and there's also this input that I touched upon last time called the controller input, which carries the information about the courses and the scale and this kind of thing from the key group. So there's all these extra inputs that by default don't get connected up. So the best way to sort this out, I use this script all the time. Like, this is the one we put on the wiki, and it's just a little script for renaming the auxiliary inputs of the recorder and the auxiliary outputs of the recorder, so they match up with the names of the outputs from the key group. So, for example, if we look at that, I haven't got it in front of me, but the first line probably of the script says something like, it says auxiliary input 1 to strip position input 1 namify. So I'm basically naming auxiliary input 1 to strip position 1. And what that means is then a little bit further down the line, when I say key group 1 output 44 to recorder connect, it's going to connect all these things up automatically for me, so I don't have to do the individual connections like strip position output 1 to auxiliary input 1, and I can just say key group 1 output 44 to recorder connect, and it will just do it all for me automatically. So that's the reason for this this script. Let me just get that up on my screen.
Auxiliary input 1 to strip position input 1 namify.
Yes.
Yes.
Why is that?
The first line.
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool.
Just checking.
Okay. So I put that script up on the wiki. So I've got that up on my screen as well now. Okay. So let's do that now. I'll go back to the commander, and I'm just going to say MIDI rig 3 recorder listen. MIDI rig 3 recorder listen. So now from now on, the only thing in Eigenharp is going to be listening to me is going to be MIDI rig 3 recorder. If I didn't do this and I run the script, there's every chance that every single recorder in the system is going to rename their inputs and outputs. So MIDI rig 3 recorder listen, and the next thing we do is run that script. So I'm just going to, because I know it works, I'm just going to copy all that I've got in my text file here. The same thing that's on the wiki. I'm just going to copy and paste that into the Eigenharp commander, hit enter, and it's going to have to think about it for a sec, and then let's give it a sec. It'll be
do sing or dance. Sing or dance.
That's taking it. Oh, there we go. Okay, so yeah, there's a bit. It's not the cleanest way of doing it, but you can see, like, basically I copied all that in, and it just did it all at once, one at a time. So you can see it all says okay. Okay, so that's really good now, because my recorders are renamed. It's quite a useful thing to do if you're ever using recorders. Just do it as soon as you build it, basically, and then you can just connect things to it without having to worry about the individual inputs and outputs. Obviously, like, we wouldn't want to have the recorders named like that by default, because the auxiliary inputs and outputs could actually be used for all sorts of things to record. Okay, so I've named that, and then the next thing we do, so that's all named, I'll say all join to get out of my conversation. So it was all join, and then it gets easier from here now, so that was the complicated stuff. So I'm going to say, first of all, let's connect up the key group to the recorder. So K group 1, output 44, 2, MIDI rig 3 recorder, K group 1, output 44 to MIDI rig 3 recorder connect. Hit enter. Check down here, it says OK. Okay, so hopefully that should all be connected up now. I'm going to show you a little trick to find out the connections to things. So if I now say MIDI rig 3 recorder connect. Okay, so that's just MIDI rig 3 recorder connect, hit enter. So this is just a little trick. So then if I go to, now I'm going to go to my Dave library, to the Eigenlabs folder basically, Dave library, Eigenlabs. I'm going to go to the release I'm using, which is 1.3.9, and then I go to log. Not sure I should really be showing people this, but here we go. You open this log, so this is where, like, for the software guys, everything gets logged. But there is, when you're building stuff, this is really useful, because if you say, if I say, yeah, like I just said, MIDI rig 3 recorder connect, if you look in the log, what it does is it prints for me all the connections to the recorder. So I'll zoom in properly, but you can see here it now says K group 1, K group output 44, controller output to recorder 14, controller input 4. So basically it's worked. So I've renamed all my inputs. So you can see here, like, let's scroll down until we find strip position input 1. Okay, yeah, so this one is the first auxiliary input 1 I renamed to recorder strip position input 1, and you can see it's nicely connected up key group output 44, strip position output 1 for me to that. So that's all worked nicely. And I guess if people want to explore the system a little bit more, that might be quite handy to be able to see what's connected to what. Okay, so back to the Eigen commander. So that's all worked well. So we've now got connection from the key group to the recorder. Next bit's pretty straightforward as well. So I'm just going to say MIDI rig 3 recorder to MIDI rig 3 scaler connect. So it goes recorder to scaler, hit enter, and the same thing applies there. So because I've named the outputs of the recorder, it matches up the output names to the input names of the scaler and makes all these connections that otherwise I'd have to do individually. It makes them all for me. Okay, MIDI rig 3 recorder to MIDI rig 3 scaler connect, and then finally, well, not finally, but MIDI rig 3 scaler to MIDI rig 3 MIDI converter connect. So that was MIDI rig 3 scaler to MIDI rig 3 MIDI converter connect. Hit enter, and then MIDI rig 3 scaler to MIDI rig 3 MIDI output. And then this one's slightly different because I've got to say using one, because in a minute we're going to connect a couple of things up to this MIDI output. So we have to distinguish between them with this using thing, which crops up all through Eigen. But so we're going to say MIDI rig 3 scaler to MIDI rig 3 MIDI output using one connect. Let me just check. MIDI rig 3. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't have done that. Okay, so I actually need to say MIDI rig 3 MIDI converter. Sorry, not scaler. MIDI rig 3 MIDI converter to MIDI rig 3 MIDI output using one connect. Okay, so just check down there, that all worked as well. Okay, so now, hopefully, that should actually be working now in its basic sense. So I've got this application called MIDI Monitor, which is really useful, from a company called Snoize, S-N-O-I-Z-E, but I use that all the time. So I open this MIDI Monitor thing, choose key group 1 output 44, and there we go, it's working. Okay, so you can see when I'm pressing, well, actually no, you can't see because I'll zoom in. You can see when I'm pressing notes, things are popping up on the screen basically. So that's all good, notes are coming out. One thing that actually is probably worth doing is just setting the MIDI channel of the MIDI converter quickly. So I'll say MIDI rig 3 MIDI converter, hey. So I'm just talking to that, MIDI rig 3 MIDI converter, hey. Can you see that? Yeah. And then I just say MIDI channel to one set. Okay, so that's all good. Okay, so that's the basic process for just getting MIDI notes out. So now you could quite happily use that to just play MIDI notes. Of course, there's also all the strip controllers and things like that. So I'm going to show you how to connect that up. First of all, I'm going to go back to Eigen. So choose Eigen. And then from the window menu, we have a look at the window menu. There's this new, the new one at the bottom, which is MIDI Converter 3. So this is the new MIDI converter we've created. So I'll click on that, and we get this really nice new MIDI matrix that Gert's built. So this is where, as probably most of you have seen before, this is where we connect up the various Eigenharp controllers to different MIDI CC messages to get sent out. At the moment, nothing will happen because there's nothing actually connected to these columns aren't connected to anything at the moment, so we need to connect things to like column 1 in order for us to connect that to a MIDI CC. So let's do that quickly. So first of all, we say... Oh, I thought you had a question. Okay.
No.
Cool. First of all, we say MIDI rig 3 recorder, and then I'm going to say strip position output 1 to MIDI rig 3 MIDI converter. Okay, so you remember we renamed the outputs of the recorder, so there is now an output called strip position output 1. So that is literally strip controller 1's relative position. So MIDI rig 3 recorder, strip position output 1 to MIDI rig 3 MIDI converter. We could just say MIDI converter 3 because we just looked in that window menu and we saw it's called MIDI converter 3. To MIDI rig 3 MIDI converter, and then parameter 1. So column 1 is input is called parameter 1. So MIDI converter, MIDI rig 3 MIDI converter, parameter 1, and then just connect. So hit enter. So that all says OK down there. I'm going to do the same thing for strip position output 2. So MIDI rig 3 recorder, strip position output 2 to MIDI rig 3 MIDI converter, parameter 2. Connect. Okay. Okay, so now we've got the strip position output from the recorder for strip controller 1 and 2 are now connected to column 1 and 2 in the MIDI matrix. What we should do is name them quickly so we know what column is what. So I say MIDI converter 3 hey, MIDI converter 3 hey, and then I'm going to say parameter 1 to strip 1 namify. Same as if we were naming anything in the system. I've just renamed the parameter 1 input to strip 1, and then I'm going to go MIDI converter 3 hey and parameter 2 to strip 2 namify. Okay, so that all says OK. Now if we look in the window, you can see at the top of the columns, they're now called strip 1 and strip 2. So that's all good. So let's just test that quickly. So strip 1, I'm going to put a tick in the box where strip 1 meets the modulation wheel, CC1. So just hit OK here. So we've just got a basic 1-to-1 mapping. I'm going to go to MIDI monitor again, just to check this. And then if I move... Let me just make it a little bit bigger so we can see. Okay, so yeah, you can hopefully see that when I'm moving the strip controller. Can you make that full screen actually?
Yeah. Oh, well, that.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you. So yeah, you can see that when I move my hand up and down the strip controller, then I'm basically sending out MIDI CC1. It's sending out the data for me. Okay, so that's that. So that's how we connect up the parameters in the MIDI converter matrix.